Hi, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me today. The topic is this concept that we call Timtum haLev, the impact of non-kosher food on the Jewish neshama. And to be honest, the subject inspiration came as I was going through Sefer Daniel in depth, and I discovered that a lot of the additional kosher laws actually stem from there. So, as someone who's had her own long journey until fully keeping kosher, I can, of course, entirely sympathize with the struggle that people have. Interestingly, when I finally started taking things seriously as far as kosher food is concerned, was when I watched these documentaries of people who grew up frum. They were in a very strong Haredi community, and one day, unfortunately, they decided to go off the derech. And there were these interviews where they asked them what it was that they did when they left the community. What was the first thing that they wanted to explore from the outside world? And I expected people to say, we went to the movies because we'd never seen a movie before, or for the girls to say, I put on a pair of jeans or something like that. But to my shock, they all reported that the first thing they did was go to McDonald's and have a cheeseburger. And that really, really shocked me because, first of all, I don't have a fascination with cheeseburgers. But I thought how interesting that someone would desire to put something non-kosher in their mouth, even though they've never had anything non-kosher. So when they had this cheeseburger, they all said the same thing. All our lives we were told that this is poison. And lo and behold, we ate the burger and nothing happened. We didn't die. Ergo, the entire religion of Judaism is a lie. And of course, it's very silly. You didn't die. Why would you die? Of course. And this phenomenon is, in fact, what makes the impact of non-kosher food so hard to grasp, because you don't feel the impact straight away. You might never feel the impact your entire life. And it's something that you don't see with your bare eyes. And the Maharal explains in Ber Hagola, which is his beautiful work on Jewish apologetics against the accusers, that of course the consequences of breaking mitzvot doraita will be felt in the olam haba, and breaking mitzvot midrabanan will be felt in this world. It will come back to bite us straight away. And of course, kashrut is a mitzvah min haTorah. But what does this actually tell us? What does this tell us about the power of kosher food that is so strong that is the first thing that pulls people off the derech? No wonder that some rabbis claim that this is the nisayon of the generation. Of course, it wasn't always like this. Even if you go back 50 years, people weren't eating out so much. Eating out has become a thing in recent years, and we have a proliferation of supermarkets and restaurants. So, back in the day, everyone went home and ate there. So we weren't surrounded by so much tuma, if you will. If kashrut has such power, it occurred to me that we've been thinking about it the wrong way the whole time, because we always think about it as a negative mitzvah. You can't eat this, you can't eat that. But what if we thought about it as a positive mitzvah? And this is precisely what I decided to do, to sort of focus on the positive aspects of the mitzvah. And instead of thinking about abstinence from non-kosher food, I could just think about the koach, the power, the spiritual oomph, or the positive impact it can have on me if I do eat kosher food, and the higher level I can achieve when I eat kosher food. So it's important to reckon with what it does to our soul. And in fact, this positive approach has examples in the Torah as well. We find examples, for example, with Sarah Imanu. We're told in the Midrash that after giving birth to Yitzhak, she actually nursed a lot of non-Jewish infants. And the Or HaChaim explains that all those children that she nursed eventually ended up converting to Judaism. So this concept, Timtum haLev, or the confusion of the heart, happens when we consume non-kosher food. And I'd just like to read to you what the Ramchal says in Mezilat Yesharim, which is, again, a beautiful work. It should be compulsory for everyone to read, I believe. He puts it best. He's a very concise author and he's always to the point, and I love the way he explains things. So the Ramchal says that the sin which ranks third after theft and forbidden relations in respect to desire is that of forbidden foods. This is because forbidden foods bring tuma into a person's heart, and the holiness of God departs and withdraws from him. This is also what our sages stated, becoming defiled with them. Read not venit metem, that you will be defiled, but venitamtem, that you will become dull-hearted. For sin dulls a man's heart, causing to depart from him true knowledge and the spirit of wisdom, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu bestows upon the pious. He is then left animal-like, material, and sunk in the coarseness of this world. The forbidden foods are worse in this regard than all other sin, since they ritually enter a person's body and become flesh of his flesh. In other parts in the Gemara, in Sota 12b, we read a story, which is a midrashic story, that Moshe had to be nursed. Of course, he was found in a basket and he had to be nursed. So they took him around to all the Egyptian wet nurses, but he did not agree to nurse from any of them. And he said, shall a mouth that in the future will speak the divine presence actually nurse from something impure? And the maiden went and called the child's mother. So even though we have the heterim for infants and have the heterim for children, we see here that Moshe refuses to nurse from a Gentile woman because it would obviously affect his nevuah in a negative way. So we need to ask ourselves, obviously we're not on the level of a tzaddik, we're on the level of a Beinoni, what does this mean for us on our level? And I truly believe that it means clarity. Clarity, or just a blurred vision, that we will lose our clarity, whether that's clarity in Torah learning or clarity when it comes to decision making of all sorts. I believe non-kosher food can have a real impact on our clarity. And another example we see in the Torah is Shimshon's mother. So Shimshon HaNazir was dedicated to be a Nazir by his mother, of course, and we read that the mother, even though she hadn't given birth to Shimshon yet, she was not permitted to eat grapes or drink wine while she was pregnant, so that Shimshon would not receive any form of nourishment from foods that are forbidden to a Nazir. So what we read in the Torah, obviously, it's all about animals that are forbidden for Jewish consumption. We read about the prohibition of mixing meat with milk. And then obviously we have rabbinic laws such as mixing chicken with milk and all those things. As I previously mentioned in other videos, I am quite uncomfortable with the term rabbinic law, just coming from a missionary background, because the term rabbinic law implies that the rabbis sat down one day and invented something, which certainly isn't the case. And as I discovered this great truth long time ago, a lot of the rabbinic law actually stems from the Nevi'im, from the prophets. And that's the same situation with Sefer Daniel as well. Sefer Daniel is one of the most fascinating Sepharim in the Tanakh. There are so many lessons to learn in the area of halacha, Jewish history, hashkafa. There are just a billion lessons for us to learn from Sefer Daniel. But the first parak talks about kashrut. And of course, in the first parak, we read that Daniel, who is very young at the time, is exiled with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah to Babylon, and they refuse to eat non-kosher food. And they actually propose a 10-day trial to the king, and they say for 10 days, we're only going to eat legumes and we're just going to drink water. So essentially eating beans. There is a long discussion in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah 36a, which says that not only did Daniel refuse to drink wine, but he also refused to drink oil of the Gentiles. And I'm not entirely certain what the oil of the Gentiles means, whether that refers to Bishul Akum or whether that refers to him not eating kosher food that's cooked in a non-kosher pot. So there are different mefarshim who say different things, but you see the concept of Bishul Akum already reflected in Sefer Daniel. So the machloket in the Gemara isn't actually referring to what he ate or what he didn't eat, but whether or not that was something that he imposed upon himself, or it was a gezerah that he decreed upon the entire Jewish nation. Now, some mefarshim suggest that the wine he was offered was actually kosher, but it was served by non-Jews, and that's why he rejected it. So here we have the concept of kosher wine served by a non-Jew, and it is actually originated from Sefer Daniel. So that's very interesting. So we've seen the mitzvah min haTorah, midrabanon, all the gezerot that the rabbis implemented, but I want to move on to the third level. And this third level is what the Ramchal calls personal perushim, personal boundaries, which is different for every single person. These are personal fences that you build around a particular nisayon you have in your life. This nisayon could be very different for every person. For me, it was kosher food, for example, but it's all based on individual circumstances, depending on where you feel tempted in life. So with kosher food, I realized early on that I had to avoid any sort of temptation. And to give you an example, where I work, in my workplace, we have a canteen. Everybody eats there. And at the beginning, I would just bring my little box of kosher food and I would eat with my colleagues, no problem. But with time, I realized that there's this beautiful display of a big, sumptuous buffet. And I'm sitting at the table with my colleagues. And of course, I see what they eat. And the hot food is literally steaming in my face. And it wasn't healthy for me because actually, even though I didn't touch the non-kosher food, I was inviting tuma into my heart, into my mind. I was creating desires. I was desiring this non-kosher food, and it wasn't healthy for me. And so these days, I just wait until the canteen is closed. I go there by myself, and I have my food all by myself in peace and quiet. Now, there is nothing in halacha that would be against my eating with my colleagues. Again, this is a personal fence that I built because I didn't think that having tuma, even in my thoughts, was healthy for me. So I separated myself. And in fact, we read from Tosafot that there was one Talmudic sage who abandoned Judaism just because his mother smelled spices that were offered in Avodah Zarah. I have friends who never touched non-kosher food in their lives. They've never eaten it. They grew up keeping kosher. But even they report that sometimes they go to the supermarket, they see something and they tell me, I see this thing, I really like it, and I never tasted it, but I have a real yetzer hara for this thing. And to that I say, just go to another supermarket or avoid the aisle. There is really no need for our minds to dwell on non-kosher food, even though we don't touch it. So sometimes we feel that the solution is to put in more hishtadlut, like we are making so much effort and it yields no results, so let's put in more efforts. And sometimes hishtadlut is not the answer. Sometimes you just have to be a little bit more cunning and trick your yetzer hara, and whatever works. I tricked my own yetzer hara because when I didn't feel the impact of non-kosher food, I used to tell myself, I wouldn't compromise my learning. Torah learning is the most important thing to me. And so I used to tell myself, if you have this piece of non-kosher food, you are not going to come to an understanding. You're not going to have the revelation over your learning. And therefore, I just had to literally bribe my yetzer hara. So sometimes we just need to bribe it, and that's all there is to it. There's another thing that comes up in Sefer Daniel that I find very interesting, and that's the question of Mezirut Nefesh. And the Mefarshim ask the question, why did Daniel even decide to propose this 10-day trial to the king? I mean, imagine this is a mighty king, and Daniel could have offended him by not accepting to eat his food. He could have offended him or upset him so much that the king could have executed him. So the Mefarshim suggest that he actually risked his life for the sake of kosher food. which of course is not one of the three things that we are obligated to give up our lives for. And there's a machloket, and the Tosafot disagree with the Rambam, because the Rambam says you shouldn't give up your life, and the Tosafot say you can give it up on a voluntary basis. And I remember having this very question when I was reading the life of the Klosenberger Rebbe in Auschwitz. And of course, in the midst of this mass starvation, he would still refuse to eat anything non-kosher. In fact, they would have kosher food, but it would be cooked in a non-kosher pot, and he wouldn't eat it. And his journey, his Mezirut Nefesh, is on a level that is completely beyond my perception. And I used to ask myself, you're supposed to eat the non-kosher food when it comes to, saving your life. And why would he even do such a thing? And indeed, one of the Rishonim from Spain, the Nimuke Yosef, talks about this concept. He asserts that a prominently pious individual who fears Hashem and recognizes the generation's spiritual decline may sacrifice his life, even though this is not technically required by halacha. But if he wants to inspire the generation to Yirat Shamayim, he is allowed to give up his life for kosher food. And it's fascinating because this was written like 1,000 years ago, so how much more relevant it is today. Even though Daniel was very, very young in this galut, he sensed a great responsibility on his shoulders. He wanted to keep the nation together. He wanted to preserve Torah observance and Jewish identity in the galut of Bavel. So I think that if the tzaddikim are willing to go this extra mile to actually give up their lives, I think the least we can do from our end is the basic. In closing, I'd like to quote the wise words of Chazal in the Gemara, because Chazal put it so nicely, so concisely, and we should really, really heed their words. So Chazal say, do not impurify yourselves with them, so that you should not be thereby impurified. A person who impurifies himself a bit, they will impurify him greatly. If a person impurifies himself of his own volition below on earth, they will impurify him even more so above in heaven. If a person impurifies himself in this world, they will impurify him in the world to come. And on a positive note, conversely, sanctify yourselves and you will be sanctified. A person who sanctifies himself a bit, they will sanctify him and assist him greatly. If a person sanctifies himself below, they will sanctify him above. And if a person sanctifies himself in this world, they will sanctify him in the world to come. Thank you, and Shavua Tov.